It's no secret that most pirate ships ran with their own set of laws and regulations, usually formulated and decreed by the captains of the ships. These laws helped keep order on board pirate ships, preventing the state of affairs from descending into total chaos. If pirate crews were to operate efficiently, they needed to adhere to these rules, or they faced unusual and often brutal punishments at the hands of their captains, many of which were not known for their kindness. One such punishment utilized by pirate captains on offending crews or captives was the cat-o'-nine-tails, a form of modified whip designed to inflict the maximum amount of pain possible on a helpless victim. Not only was this horrific instrument utilized on pirate ships, but throughout wider history also. And this will be the grisly topic of today's video. From its early origins to its widespread usage throughout the years of the golden age of piracy, this is the story of the cat-o'-nine-tails, one of the most brutal pirate torture methods in all of history. History of the cat-o'-nine-tails. First of all, let's discuss the nightmarish form of the cat-o'-nine-tails and how it was used to inflict as much pain as possible. Typically made of cotton cord or leather, the cat-o'-nine-tails was a modified form of whip, whose lashes separated into 9 individual threads in order to cause 9 individual strikes with one swing. On a typical cat-o'-nine-tails, the lashes were roughly 75 centimeters in length, complete with knots tied into the ends of each one, designed to lacerate the skin of the victim. The lashes are occasionally made by plaiting separate cords together, which thickens them and maximizes the pain caused by striking a victim with it. Variations have been created throughout history that contain different numbers of tails adapted to suit various punishments. The cat-o'-nine-tails is thought to have been invented in its earliest form in ancient Egypt. The name is speculated to have arisen from the view that the cat was a sacred animal, a holy creature with 9 lives. The 9 lashes of the instrument therefore represent the 9 lives of a cat, and the belief was held in Egypt that when beaten with the cat-o'-nine-tails, the victim would gain virtue and become more holy. Moreover, the wounds left behind by the lashes do indeed resemble the scratches of a cat. It is a punishment that has been associated with maritime crime and insubordination for centuries, and cat-o'-nine-tails were often kept in bags on board ships to whip mutinous or otherwise treacherous sailors. To give somebody lashes from the cat was therefore to let the cat out of the bag, which is where the famous saying is thought to have come from. The cat-o'-nine-tails is also closely associated with the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade, where roughly 12.5 million Africans were seized from their homelands and forced onto ships, where they would work on plantations and in houses elsewhere in the world. Slaves were treated horrifically throughout this period, and lashings from a cat-o'-nine-tails were common ways of torturing these poor people. Usage in piracy and in the Navy. Despite having origins deeply rooted in some of the bloodiest and darkest moments of history, the cat-o'-nine-tails is most famous as a method of torture used on board boats, most commonly in the military, but more often than not on board pirate ships. On pirate ships, the cat could be utilized against crew members who had been caught stealing from their fellow man. Floggings from the cat-o'-nine-tail were designed not to kill the perceived offender, but rather to seriously injure them, ensuring they would learn a terrible lesson for the future. Some pirates put their own barbaric twist on the conventional model of the cat-o'-nine-tails, tying fishing hooks or musket balls to the end of the lashes. Musket balls would have created seethingly painful bruises on the skin from blunt force impact, whereas fish hooks would have left the skin shredded and tattered as they made contact. As an extra indignity, pirates were known to have applied salt and vinegar to the open wounds caused by fish hook lashings. Is anyone else getting hungry talking about fish, salt and vinegar? The pirate's life was not an easy one, and the cat-o'-nine-tails was one of the more common ways pirates dealt with wrongdoers on board their ships. The brutality of the cat-o'-nine-tails wasn't restricted to sailors outside the realms of the law, however. As we briefly mentioned earlier, most naval vessels were equipped with a bag containing the grim instrument to be used to apply swift and painful torture to an insubordinate sailor or officer in quick time. Such flogging sessions were issued by either the captain of the vessel or by the court-martial, and were turned into spectacles for the whole crew to observe. At gunpoint, the offending sailor would be walked to the main deck. He could have committed any offense from drunkenness to full-scale mutiny to receive lashes, which ranged in number from around a dozen to up to 500 in extreme cases. The cat would be held high above the head of the man wielding it, which would be brought down onto the bare back of the offender with great force, using the full sweep of the officer's arm. This would have been hugely painful regardless of the whip used, but naval cat-o'-nine-tails were typically knotted at several points along each lash to cause additional bleeding and pain. Just one lash could shred the skin on a man's back, so imagine how a person must feel after receiving 500. The most extreme case of lashing from the cat o' nine tails was given to a sailor who was found guilty of sodomy. He received 1,000 lashes, essentially a death sentence. Inciting or taking part in a mutiny would lead to the offender being lashed around the legs or feet, which would have been especially painful. Here, the number of lashes would typically be divided by the number of ships in port at the given time, and the victim would be rowed on a small boat in and out of them. At busy times, this could result in hundreds upon hundreds of painful lashes. Wounds would often be dressed with seawater, not as a salty punishment, but because science at the time believed it would help the lacerations on the victim's body to heal. This, of course, is now known to be false. Seawater contains countless harmful microbes that could be dangerous to open wounds. This may have led to the development of the phrase to rub salt on the wound. Alarmingly, young men and boys also fell victim to the cat o' nine tails in some cases, albeit with a smaller, smoother, 5-lashed version known as the boy's cat. These lashes were typically given over the backside or hands as opposed to the back. Where a cat was not available, a long, thin rod made of birchwood would be used. In some cases, lashes from the cat o' nine tails were just one part of the punishment. Sailors would perhaps receive a few dozen lashes to start, but were then forced to run the gauntlet. This involved the sailor running through a narrow gap created between two tightly packed rows of his colleagues, who would lash out and beat him with their fists, legs, weapons, or other objects. By the time the victim had run through the rows of men several times, he was battered and bruised, sometimes beyond repair. The British Army were also known to use a similar punishment for soldiers who were out of line or insubordinate. This instrument was typically made from a drumstick with 9 lashes attached, rather than a piece of plaited leather or rope. This likely would have enabled the wielder to gain a firmer hold on the weapon, causing untold pain. One eyewitness account directly from a soldier who was whipped with the cat o' nine tails in 1832 described it as an astounding sensation between the shoulders under my neck, which went to my toenails in one direction and my fingernails in another, and stung me to the heart as if a knife had gone through my body. He continued to say that the torturer whipped him, quote, a second time a few inches lower, and then I thought the former stroke was sweet and agreeable compared with that one. I felt my flesh quiver in every nerve from the scalp of my head to my toenails. The time between each stroke seemed so long as to be agonizing, and yet the next came too soon. The pain in my lungs was more severe, I thought, than on my back. I felt as if I would burst in the internal parts of my body. The soldier went on to describe how several of the lashes caused him to bite down hard on his lips and tongue, causing them too to bleed. He felt himself choke and become dark in the face with fear and pain, and this was only after the first 50 lashes. Quote, I felt as if I had lived all the time of my real life in pain and torture, and that the time when existence had pleasure in it was a dream long, long gone by, he finalized his account with. These are coincidentally the lyrics for my emo band's new single. Beyond piracy and the military, the cat o' nine tails is known to have been used as an instrument of torture inflicted upon those who have committed crimes. Supplies of cat o' nine tails were shipped out to UK prisons in the 1950s to be used upon convicts who had continued to behave violently whilst locked up. These brutal whips were also used in Britain's penal colonies out in Australia. Reports from these locations tell of lead weights attached to each of the 9 lashes, a device that was feared across the British Empire. The cat o' nine tails today. Britain ceased to use the cat o' nine tails around the late 1950s, with several ex-colonial countries, namely Australia, South Africa, Uganda, Fiji, and Jamaica, following suit in the years that followed. However, several Commonwealth countries do still adopt it to this day. Ironically, these nations are situated in the area most commonly associated with the golden age of piracy, the Caribbean. Antigua and Barbuda, for example, reinstated the use of the cat o' nine tails to deal with criminals in 1990, and Trinidad and Tobago actually never stopped employing its use. To this day, any offender aged 18 or above can be subjected to its cruel lashes. The continuous usage of the cat has led to some to criticize the government of Trinidad and Tobago, describing its usage accurately, cruel, inhuman, and degrading. In 2005, the government was actually ordered to pay $50,000 in damage to a man who had been sentenced to receive 15 lashes. Hopefully, in the years that follow, such cruel and unusual punishment will be abolished altogether. So that's the brutal and unsettling history of the dreaded cat o' nine tails, as well as the gory part it played in the golden age of piracy. The cat was by no means the only pirate punishment, and we have covered several of these in brief detail on other videos on this channel. It's no secret that throughout history, human beings have devised unimaginably painful and creative torture methods to inflict upon one another, but the pirates, with their hook-ridden whips, were surely one of the most brutal. It turns out that the pirate's life wasn't all sea shanties, treasure, and tankards of rum. Thank you for watching this episode of Walk the Plank. I do hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you next week for another video. Cheers!